My name is Abby Weaver, and we'll be going through the upper grades of middle school and high school. This meeting is recorded and will be posted on OCALI's website for educational purposes. Considerations for deaf and hard of hearing learners in the general education classroom, middle school and high school edition. I'm deaf, so I'm coming from a cultural perspective, and some of you may prefer disability person first language. So I'm going to try to be mindful to go back and forth on person first language, but I am coming from a cultural perspective. Objectives. 1, participants will name one resource document used to facilitate the education of deaf and hard of hearing students and a reason that supports the use of the document. 2, participants will list 2 resources to support the mental health of deaf and hard of hearing students and name one reason why it's important. 3, participants will explain the difference between modifications and accommodations and their future implications. Communication plan revisited. I know you guys are tired of seeing this. It was in the last 2 webinars, but we are now getting into the teenage years. Talking with your peers is critical for so many reasons, but this is when the friends become more important than the adults. I hate to say that, but that's part of our life process, and that gets you ready for in the future when you are working in a job outside of the home. So now you're not just navigating your family and their expectations and those family relationships. You are now with peers, and then in the future, coworkers or a boss or a manager. Technology should also be utilized. Too often when we think about speech therapy or language therapy, we don't think about the use of language and this is tricky to do in the school environment, but I do want to put it out there. How does one communicate via cell phone, texting, the traditional phone, email, the not in-person types of communication that we need to do, because that's such a big part of our world today. And the expanded core curriculum is also something that I mentioned in the other webinars. But at each stage, the demands are going to get upon you a little bit more. How I navigate my hearing loss or hearing range, however you like to phrase it. 1, it could have changed. I could have had a progressive hearing loss. 2, it's going to change with age. More and more should be placed upon me and not on the adults around me. I need to navigate how I use my interpreter, how I use my microphone, how I use my assisted listening devices. Social and emotional considerations. Deaf and hard of hearing individuals may encounter additional risk factors that can impact their social and emotional wellness. This is nothing against, schools or families. This is just the nature of it. You may feel different. You may feel isolated, especially if you are mainstreamed and you're the only deaf and hard of hearing individual in that building or that district. Language isolation or language deprivation, if you're not on level language-wise with your peers, or you are on level language-wise, but you're still missing pieces of information, that incidental learning in the world around you. It's not just the academics that we're looking at. Children with disabilities are 2 to 3 times more likely with disabilities. So deaf and hard of hearing kids are 2 to 3 times more likely to experience abuse or neglect than their non-disabled peers. It's a dark, ugly truth. Sometimes predators or other individuals in the world will take advantage of people that are different or communicate differently, or they may not have the language to communicate what's happening. And mental health assessment tools are often not modified to take into account the linguistic characteristics of the deaf and hard of hearing population. So even if we're just looking at a mental health aspect, you need to make sure that you have a trained individual assessing a deaf and hard of hearing teenager as they go through those hard years. Be like, oh, there really is something else going on mental health wise, or it's just the trauma that they're processing through that they may have had. It's hard to kind of break everything apart there. Social and emotional resources. Ohio Department of Mental Health and Addiction Services. Their website cover behavioral health topics in American Sign Language with captions and voiceover. There's also a Deaf Off Drugs out of Wright State University, where that could be something that you seek out. I hope it's unlikely that you're not going to run into some type of substance abuse, drugs, or alcohol within the student's family, or if they're experimenting themselves and you need to address that as a school, as a team. And you need resources. You don't even know where to begin. Here's a place that you can reference. And then there's one last resource where they host a bank of resources on their website related to mental health services for deaf and hard of hearing people. This may not be related to drugs and alcohol. It could be just the trauma of COVID-19 that many of us are going through in that isolation. That's also been compounded by your hearing loss. The communication in the school setting. Consider the communication needs of the child and the opportunities that they have for direct communication. Email, face-to-face, the announcement systems in the school, assemblies and conferences. There's so much different types of communication that I kind of hinted at earlier, with the texting and the phone calls. If you have a middle schooler or a high schooler who's avoiding the phone and calling a friend, although there's a little bit of a generational difference there, that needs to be addressed because they need to be able to navigate the phone to call the doctor when they're older and they've left school, or they need to call their boss in the future. And communication barriers can present to invisible barriers that lead to missed opportunities. So College Credit Plus, they're having a meeting on College Credit Plus, and you didn't hear the PA system. Right there was an opportunity to take it away from you just because of your hearing loss, and that PA system wasn't accessible. Even if you saw the caption or the interpreter and you don't have that incidental background knowledge, oh, College Credit Plus, I can take college classes and maybe not have as much student debt when I graduate college, 21, 22, 23. You want to make sure that the student has that access. So don't assume just because they saw that they understood it. Accommodations for modifications. Accommodations provide a student equal access to the material being taught. And this can continue into adulthood. So even now, as a teacher with a hearing loss who's deaf, there may be accommodations in the work environment, such as opening day, I might have an interpreter. Or the school is playing a safety video and that's captioned. Modifications changes what a student is expected to learn. Less common in adulthood, such as the different grading scale or completing different homework problems than their peers, or being excused from certain projects or a different deadline and due dates. That's not as common in the college environment or the work environment. So we need to teach our students and families up front, this is an accommodation, this is a modification, both have their time and place. Someday those modifications are going to fade away because you're going to be expected to carry the same workload as another peer in the work environment. Student involvement in accommodations. As students mature, they should have a seat at the table when discussing their accommodation and determining which accommodations are needed. You're also going to have to model, and kind of work with them on the pros and cons, why, what situation do you need an interpreter? Students need direct instruction and guided practice on how to address barriers and to teach them to be proactive. Students should practice making accessibility requests to an identified individual within a school setting for supports during various supplementals and extracurricular opportunities. I have a mock interpreting form that my students fill in to get them used to the timelines. When do I ask for an interpreter? How do I ask for an interpreter? What information does the interpreter need to know? Oh, you need to report to the gym or the stage, at 6 o'clock on Friday night for the school performance because I'm doing whatever in drama club. That's an important lifelong skill. Who and how of accommodations. Build an accommodation and local resource portfolio with their student for their IEP, ETR, 504, audiogram, any accommodations they use. I call this the Yes, I'm Still Deaf binder. In my personal life, at 40, I've had to go back and pull even middle school audiograms for certain situations in my life and say, no, I didn't become deaf overnight. The accommodations I need have been in place since, the 80s. But that makes a stronger case. So having that binder can be really important when you run into a situation down the road. And I also stress to my students, a lot of this information that we are giving you right now is free. But when you're older and you have to go and get new documentation that, yes, I'm still deaf, you're going to want to put that in the binder. So when something pops up, here you go, versus having to make an appointment, get in, get the results, get the test, get the letter. And then also what I've done is for a lot of my students, I make them learn, such as what are the local interpreting agencies? What's the time and cost for having an interpreter come from Columbus or Cincinnati or a virtual interpreter versus an on-site interpreter, or captionist, all right, because I do both. Who are the disability caseworkers and managers at the colleges and universities of interest? I can't set up certain accommodations for you when you're doing College Credit Plus. I can build the bridge and connect you. But you're taking a college class on campus, I'm going to connect you with the next service provider, and you're going to need to follow their timeline. And then how can I be an educated consumer when I'm purchasing accommodations or access and supports? Why do I want interpreting agency A over interpreting agency B? Or why would I use this interpreting agency versus a language agency? Or why do I want an on-site interpreting agency versus a virtual? There's a lot of things that you have to think about. It's not just cost. Sometimes we look only at the dollar bill cost, but what's the quality of the services you're getting? Visiting future educational sites. So here I have a picture of a Think Labs One digital stethoscope. I actually worked with OOD, and I'm going to have to think, I still want to go back to the old name, Opportunities for Ohioans with Disabilities. They helped partner with us at the school to get this stethoscope for my student when she was at a local trade school or career tech school. So when she graduated, she would walk out the door with a tool she knew how to use when she walked into that interview and walked into her new job site. That right there was, I think it was $600 stethoscope. Now, yes, the employer is supposed to provide, but now when I have my stressful first new job, I already have a tool I know how to use. So identify what training programs you're interested in as a student. Identify possible barriers possible prior to starting the program so you can problem solve in advance versus last minute. And then identify possible solutions to known barriers within the program as a teacher student team. I do not know everything about nursing or welding. So I bring my deaf ed background and then I kind of pick the welding teacher's brain. Thank you very much. And it's a marriage of beautiful knowledge that supports the student, and the student knows their needs as well. Identify what accommodations are needed in the field for a training program. So I've mentioned College Credit Plus considerations because this is kind of a game changer for the next generation. How does the student connect with the college for accommodations? When and how will the captioning, interpreter, or assistive listening device be provided and used within the College Credit Plus instruction? Very different if it's at the local high school or they're having to go on campus or online. So is it accessible online? Is it accessible on site away from the traditional high school? I also, and you can see here on the screen, I have OSU, well, the Ohio State University, and then I also have Tri-C as well. So you've got two different screen snapshots there. I have my students go through and look at the local colleges, trade schools, programs to see what accessibility options there are, but also timelines. You can tell a lot about an institution on how much they put out about student accessibility services. Understanding the Americans with Disability Act, ADA. Each person has a role within the ADA. Questions to consider when providing accommodations. Are you making your space accessible both in the physical and virtual environment? This is a big thing right now. It's not just for the student. I also want to encourage you to think about parents. You may have deaf parents that are coming to the high school graduation, or right now I have a school that's doing a Washington, DC trip that's coming up this summer. So there was an informational meeting last night. Who do you contact for ADA requests within the districts? Because sometimes people aren't sure what's the timeline. Who? Okay, but it's for the parent, but not for the student. Is it special ed or HR, or it may even be for an employee, a teacher that has hearing loss or other disabilities. What school events, ceremonies, field trips, and other aspects need to be looked at for accessibility? So I just want to plant that seed for all of you. Field trips and other learning opportunities. There's so many things out there. Request on-site accommodations can include, and there are even virtual field trips now, so, but captioning, the quality of the captioning, human, captionist versus machine, venue interpreter versus the educational interpreter. The theatrical interpreter will be on stage and have had access to the script and appropriate lighting, whereas the educational interpreter is interpreting the conversation between the peers. Lighting, preferential, strategic seating, extra considerations about overnight field trips or out-of-state country field trips. This gets really complicated. Like I mentioned, the Washington, D.C. trip that I'm going to be planning for, I've got the school interpreter, but when they go to the White House, I'm going to use the White House interpreter or the Supreme Court interpreter. And then the use of assistive listening devices at the venue. And if you are going overseas, which shouldn't be anytime soon, but if and when that starts happening, I went to England and France with my high school and I took my FM, but there were things that we had to think about. And the same thing for out of state. And the power of camp and peers. We had talked about it briefly. Peer relationships are critical at this age. So there's several resources on this slide. Please go and check them out. Even if you go to a local deaf camp, and some people like, I'm not deaf. There's also hard of hearing kids. When I say deaf, I'm talking about the whole range. And seeing other individuals that communicate like you and wear technology like you, or sign like you, or do both, where they sign and talk, that's important. You meet peers, and you also meet adult role models. And here's some resources that you can check out. There's also a handy PDF resource page that you can go look at for additional information, because mental health is a big challenge in this age bracket, and it does actually impact your physical health later on. If those of you that are familiar with adverse childhood experiences, that's a whole nother day, but it does have a physical implication for deaf and hard of hearing individuals as well and their health. And then thank you, and visit us at www.ocali.org.